What would you do if the heart of your community was at risk? Eleanor Williams faced a huge challenge when a rent hike threatened her beloved grocery store. But what she did next could change everything. Watch to see how one woman's fight for what's right turned the tide and kept the store and the community alive. You won't believe how it all unfolds. Want to see how this story unfolds? Subscribe now and stay tuned for more inspiring journeys. Eleanor Williams sat by the window of her small, sunlit kitchen, carefully clipping coupons from a stack of newspapers. Her hands, weathered by years of work and sacrifice, moved with a precision that spoke of habit and necessity. The kitchen, though modest, was warm and inviting. The scent of freshly brewed tea lingered in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of lavender from a candle burning on the windowsill. Shelves lined with jars of homemade preserves and neatly folded dish towels told the story of a woman who found joy in simplicity. Her eyes lingered on a picture frame perched on the counter, a black and white photo of a young couple on their wedding day. Eleanor smiled softly, tracing the edge of the frame with her finger. Her late husband, Clarence, had always teased her about her love for coupons. You could find a deal on air if they sold it, he'd joke, his deep laugh filling the room. Those were good times, she thought, though they hadn't been without their struggles. Raising 3 children on Clarence's factory wages and her teaching salary had meant making every penny count. Coupons weren't just a habit, they were a lifeline. The rhythmic snip of her scissors paused as Eleanor's gaze shifted to her old coupon organizer, its edges frayed from years of use. Inside were neatly arranged slips of paper, each representing a small victory against the rising cost of living. She sighed, thinking about how much prices had climbed since she first started using them. Every dollar saved meant a little more room for the unexpected, like helping her neighbor's daughter pay for school supplies or donating to the local food pantry. Eleanor had always believed in stretching what little she had to help others. Outside, the neighborhood was beginning to stir. The sound of children laughing echoed down the street, and the faint rumble of cars signaled the start of another day. Eleanor folded the last coupon into her pouch and stood, her movements deliberate and unhurried. She picked up her canvas shopping bag, its handle worn but sturdy, and draped it over her arm. Today was grocery day, and she had planned her trip with the care of a seasoned strategist. Before leaving, she glanced at her reflection in the hallway mirror. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, and her dress, though simple, was pressed and tidy. She adjusted the scarf around her neck, its deep purple hue a striking contrast to her warm brown skin. Ready as ever, she murmured to herself, her voice steady, though tinged with a trace of melancholy. Grocery shopping had once been a task she and Clarence did together, but now it was one of many routines she tackled alone. As Eleanor stepped onto the porch, the crisp autumn air greeted her with a gentle embrace. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the rows of houses that lined the street. A young woman walking by with a stroller waved cheerfully. "Good morning, Mrs. Williams. Heading to Harper's?" Eleanor nodded, a kind smile softening her features. "Morning, dear. Yes, just a quick trip today." The young mother chuckled. "Bet you'll find better deals than anyone else in town." Eleanor's smile widened, and she waved as the woman continued down the sidewalk. She clutched her bag a little tighter, her heart swelling with a quiet pride. She might not have much, but what she had, she knew how to make last. As she walked toward the grocery store, her mind wandered to the conversation she'd overheard at church the previous Sunday. A friend had mentioned how the store's manager, Greg Harper, had been treating customers poorly lately, especially those who didn't spend big. Eleanor had shrugged it off then. She'd been shopping there for years without trouble. Still, the thought lingered. "Times change," she mused aloud, the words carried away by the breeze. Little did she know, this trip to Harper's Groceries would be unlike any she'd taken before. What awaited her inside would not only test her resilience, but ignite a chain of events she could never have imagined. The bus ride was uneventful, filled with the hum of conversation and the occasional laughter from teenagers in the back. Eleanor gazed out the window, her thoughts drifting as the cityscape unfolded. Tall buildings loomed over the streets, their glass facades catching the morning sun, while clusters of small businesses nestled along the sidewalks bustled with activity. She liked this route. It gave her a sense of connection to the world, even if she rarely indulged in the offerings of the shops she passed. When the bus slowed to a stop near Harper's Groceries, Eleanor rose, steadying herself against the rail before descending the steps. The store stood across the street, its bright red sign beckoning customers inside. It wasn't the fanciest grocery store, but it was well stocked and close enough for Eleanor to frequent without trouble. Adjusting her scarf against the light chill in the air, she crossed the street, her bag swinging gently at her side. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss, and Eleanor stepped into the familiar environment of the store. The scent of freshly baked bread mingled with the crisp aroma of produce, and the faint hum of refrigeration units filled the air. She paused briefly, taking in the sights of shoppers moving purposefully between aisles. She had been here countless times before, but today she noticed something different. A young woman in a sharp suit stood near the customer service desk, speaking animatedly with Greg Harper, the store manager. Eleanor's gaze lingered on Greg for a moment. He was a man in his 30s with a sharp jawline and a demeanor that seemed perpetually rushed. She had seen him before, always darting around the store, giving curt instructions to employees. He didn't often interact with customers unless there was a problem, and even then, his tone bordered on impatience. Eleanor dismissed the interaction and made her way toward the carts, her focus shifting to her list and the task ahead. As she moved through the store, she worked methodically, picking items from the shelves and checking off her list. Her eyes scanned the price tags with precision, and she occasionally paused to compare products. 89 cents for the generic, she murmured under her breath, slipping a can of green beans into her bag. Her cart wasn't full. Eleanor never bought more than she needed, but every item was carefully chosen to stretch her limited budget. The atmosphere in the store was calm, punctuated by the occasional squeak of a cart or the chatter of children pleading for snacks. Eleanor didn't rush. She never did. Shopping was her time to think, to plan, and to savor small victories. As she reached the checkout counter, she placed her items on the conveyor belt with care, her coupons neatly stacked and ready. The cashier, a young woman with a friendly smile, began scanning Eleanor's items. Eleanor handed her the coupons, which she accepted with practiced ease. But just as the transaction began, Greg Harper appeared behind the counter. His presence was abrupt, his posture stiff as he glanced at the coupons. "What's going on here?" he asked sharply, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the stack in the cashier's hand. The cashier hesitated. "Just processing these, Mr. Harper. They're valid." Greg leaned over the counter, inspecting the coupons with exaggerated scrutiny. "These things," he said, holding one up as though it were contaminated, "are more trouble than they're worth. Slows the line down, confuses the system." He turned his gaze to Eleanor, his voice adopting a condescending tone. "Ma'am, maybe next time stick to regular purchases. These discounts aren't really meant to cover everything, you know." Eleanor's face remained calm, though a flicker of indignation crossed her eyes. "These discounts," she said evenly, "are meant for people who need them, and they're valid." Greg shrugged, clearly unimpressed. "I suppose. But don't hold up the line again. We've got paying customers waiting." The cashier flushed, fumbling with the coupons, and Eleanor felt the weight of eyes on her. Other customers had turned to watch, their expressions ranging from curiosity to discomfort. Her hands tightened slightly on the edge of her shopping bag, but she said nothing more. Dignity, she reminded herself, was something no one could take unless she allowed it. As she gathered her items and walked toward the exit, the sting of humiliation settled in. It wasn't the first time someone had treated her like she didn't belong, like her presence was an inconvenience. But as she stepped outside into the crisp morning air, she promised herself it would be the last. Eleanor walked down the street with slow, deliberate steps, her shopping bag swaying lightly against her side. The weight of Greg Harper's words lingered in her mind, not because she hadn't faced such treatment before, but because it stirred something deep within her, a familiar ache mixed with a quiet, simmering determination. She had spent a lifetime swallowing indignities like these, brushing them off for the sake of peace. But this time, it felt different. Maybe it was the way Greg spoke as if she didn't matter, or maybe it was the way the other customers averted their eyes, unwilling to acknowledge what had happened. Either way, Eleanor knew this feeling wasn't going to fade easily. She turned a corner and entered the small park she often passed on her way home. A bench under a large oak tree beckoned, and she sat down, setting her bag beside her. The sunlight filtered through the branches, casting dappled shadows on the ground. She took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill her lungs, and closed her eyes for a moment. Memories of Charles surfaced unbidden, his deep voice urging her to stand tall, his laughter that could lighten even the heaviest of days. She could almost hear him now, gently teasing her. "Eleanor, you've never let anyone tell you what you're worth. Don't start now." A smile tugged at her lips, but it quickly faded. She opened her eyes and stared ahead, her gaze fixed on the children playing near the swings. Her thoughts turned to the young mother she had spoken to earlier that week, the one juggling bills and groceries while raising 2 kids on her own. How many others in this community, she wondered, relied on those same coupons to make ends meet? How many were made to feel small for simply trying to survive? Her reflection was interrupted by the chirp of a small bird hopping near her feet. Eleanor reached into her bag and tore a corner off the loaf of bread she had bought, scattering the crumbs on the ground. The bird pecked eagerly, and she watched it with a quiet intensity, as if the act of feeding it brought her some clarity. She wasn't angry, not really. Anger was fleeting, but purpose, that was something she could hold on to. Eleanor straightened her shoulders, her grip tightening on the shopping bag's handles. For years, she had lived frugally, setting aside what little she could for emergencies. Charles's pension had helped, but she had never dipped into the modest inheritance he had left her, not even when times were tough. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to make a difference. The thought formed slowly, like a seed taking root in her mind. What if she could do something more than just defend herself? What if she could ensure that no one else in her community had to endure the indignity she had faced today? The idea seemed bold, almost absurd at first, but the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. She had always been practical, resourceful, and determined, and now she realized she had the means to act. Eleanor rose from the bench, her steps lighter and her mind sharper. The faint hum of traffic and children's laughter faded into the background as a single, unwavering thought took hold. It was time to stop letting others decide her worth. It was time to change the narrative, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel invisible. She didn't yet know how, but she knew where to start. And it all began with a grocery store. The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls, research, and quiet determination. Eleanor didn't speak much to anyone about what she was planning. It wasn't the type of thing you mentioned casually over tea or on a walk through the neighborhood. No, this was something that needed to be done in silence, without the weight of others' doubts or discouragement. Eleanor had always preferred to act first, explain later. She spent hours at the local library, poring over business guides, real estate listings, and any legal documents she could get her hands on. She wasn't naive. Buying a store wasn't going to be simple, but it wasn't impossible either. She knew the basics of business. Her late husband had managed finances for years, and over time, she had learned to handle things herself, from bills to taxes to budgeting for the household. This was no different. The store, Harper's Groceries, was struggling. That much was clear from her research. The small neighborhood store had been in business for decades, but it was showing signs of wear. Customer complaints about high prices and poor service were frequent, and Greg Harper's father, the store's original owner, was too distant to care. Greg had inherited the business but had little interest in running it well. He seemed content with its slow decline, unconcerned about the people who relied on it. Eleanor's plan was simple, in theory. She would use her inheritance, the money that had sat idle for years, untouched except for the occasional donation to charity, to purchase the store. The thought of it both thrilled and scared her. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how little she truly knew about running a grocery business. But what she lacked in expertise, she made up for with determination and a deep sense of justice. She had spent too many years watching others suffer under the weight of unfair prices and corporate greed. Now, it was her turn to fight back. She spoke with a local attorney, a woman named Vanessa who had helped her with legal matters in the past. Vanessa was surprised when Eleanor mentioned her intentions. "You want to buy the store?" Vanessa had asked, her voice laced with disbelief. "I'm not sure you realize just how much work that's going to take." Eleanor nodded, a quiet confidence settling over her. "I understand, but it's a fight worth having." Vanessa agreed to help her, walking her through the legal steps and paperwork involved. Eleanor also reached out to a financial advisor who helped her calculate the costs and potential for profit. The numbers were tight, but not impossible. The inheritance wasn't large by some standards, but it was enough to make a significant impact. As the days passed, Eleanor found herself drawn into the intricacies of the process, each phone call and email making her feel more certain of her decision. She wasn't naive. She knew there would be challenges ahead, but there was a fire in her heart that made her feel alive again. She wasn't just doing this for herself. She was doing it for every person who had been made to feel less than. She was doing it for the young mother with too many bills and too few options, for the elderly neighbor who couldn't afford the rising costs of groceries, for everyone who had quietly borne the weight of the world without complaint. Eleanor had always believed in small acts of kindness, the kind that go unnoticed, the kind that make a quiet difference. But this was different. This was a chance to change the system, to give people something they hadn't known they could have. A place that valued them, that respected them, that treated them with the dignity they deserved. It took weeks, but finally, after a series of tense meetings and a few minor hurdles, the deal was done. Eleanor Williams, at the age of 75, was now the proud owner of Harper's Groceries. The day the papers were signed, she sat at the kitchen table, looking over the documents. Her fingers brushed over the bold official signatures, her own and the previous owners. There was a sense of finality to it, and yet, as she signed her name, Eleanor felt a quiet surge of pride. It wasn't just about buying a store. It was about taking control, about changing the rules of the game. The next step was clear. Eleanor had no illusions that things would be easy. Greg Harper wasn't going to step down willingly. The employees wouldn't necessarily welcome her with open arms. But Eleanor knew this was only the beginning. She was ready to make her mark, and this time, no one would be able to ignore her. She could already picture it in her mind. The shelves stocked with affordable goods, the sign over the door that would soon read, "Harper's Groceries, a community-owned business." And as she put the pen down, Eleanor whispered to herself, "This is just the start." The following week, Eleanor visited the store for the first time as its owner. She stood outside Harper's Groceries, her fingers wrapped around the keys to the place, feeling the weight of them like a tangible promise. The store, with its fading red and white sign and dated storefront, looked the same as always, unremarkable and slightly worn. But to Eleanor it felt like the beginning of something new, something far bigger than just a business transaction. The inside of the store was just as she remembered. Crowded aisles, cluttered shelves, and an air of neglect that seemed to hang in the fluorescent-lit space. The checkout lanes were sparse, and the floor, though swept clean, bore the marks of heavy use. There was a tiredness to the place, as if it had lost its vitality along with the drive to be better. But Eleanor knew that this could change. Greg Harper was at the counter when she entered, his back turned as he spoke with a stock boy. Eleanor hesitated, her heart racing slightly as she prepared for the confrontation. She had expected this moment to feel more overwhelming, but there was an odd calmness within her, as if she had been building toward this very second her entire life. She cleared her throat. Greg's head snapped around, his eyes widening in shock as he saw her standing there, a folder of documents tucked under her arm. The realization hit him quickly, his expression shifting from surprise to disbelief. He straightened his posture, eyes narrowing. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice tinged with hostility. Eleanor didn't flinch. "I'm the new owner," she said simply, her tone unwavering. There was a long pause, the air between them thick with tension. Greg blinked as though the words hadn't quite sunk in. He shook his head, a laugh escaping him, though it was more of a nervous, incredulous sound. "You, the new owner?" he scoffed. "You're not serious, are you?" Eleanor met his gaze evenly. "Very serious." Greg took a step forward, the sharp edge of his demeanor evident in the way he crossed his arms. "You can't just waltz in here and take over a business you know nothing about," he said, his voice growing louder. "This isn't a charity. You think you can just make changes, put people out of jobs, cut prices like it's nothing?" Eleanor took a step closer, her eyes never leaving his. "I've been working with my lawyer and financial advisor. I know exactly what I'm doing. This place isn't just a business to me. It's a place where people depend on good food at fair prices. It's time to make it right." Greg's jaw clenched, his face flushed with frustration. He didn't like being challenged, and he didn't like the idea of losing control over something he had taken for granted. But as Eleanor stood there, unwavering, he realized something. She wasn't just any old woman, a frail customer. She had the presence of someone who knew exactly what they wanted and wasn't afraid to take it. "Well," he muttered, his voice low, "this is going to be interesting. But don't expect me to just step aside." Eleanor's lips curled into a small smile. "I don't expect you to step aside, but you will be answering to me now. I'll need your help to make this work." Greg looked taken aback by her unexpected request. "Help?" he scoffed. "I don't owe you anything." Eleanor didn't press. "You don't have to, but if you want to keep your job here, I suggest you start thinking of ways to improve the store. People need value. They don't need high prices and poor service." For a moment, Greg stood still, weighing his options. He could fight this, could try to run her out, but a deep, gnawing instinct told him she wasn't going to back down. This woman, Eleanor, was no pushover. And as much as he hated it, he knew she had a point. The store was in trouble, and it had been for a while. He finally nodded stiffly. "Fine, but you're not going to turn this place into some charity. You want people to come here? You better make it worth their while." Eleanor smiled, her calm demeanor unwavering. "I intend to." She walked past him, taking a quick survey of the aisles, the shelves of goods, and the layout of the store. She had a vision now, one that wasn't limited by the walls of this place. She saw a space where people didn't feel like they were being taken advantage of, where they could find what they needed without the stress of exorbitant prices and bad service. It would take time, and it would take effort, but Eleanor was patient. And she had a plan. She walked over to the front desk, taking in the cluttered space behind it. There was so much that needed to be done: product reorganization, price adjustments, signage improvements. But it all started with a small but powerful change. Eleanor made it her priority to ensure that customers came first. And as the morning went on, she spoke to the staff, mostly young people who seemed a bit wary of her presence. There was Jasmine, a cashier in her 20s, who was clearly trying to keep up with the demands of the job, but seemed disengaged. Mike, a stalker in his late teens, looked at Eleanor with confusion, unsure of what changes she was proposing. She spoke with each of them, asking questions about their routines, their challenges, and what they thought the store needed. Slowly, she began planting seeds of change. By the end of the day, Eleanor had a plan, one that wasn't just about lower prices, but about building a community. She would hold workshops for budgeting, couponing, and nutrition. She would introduce a loyalty program that rewarded regular customers. And most importantly, she would ensure that the prices were fair, that no one would feel shamed or dismissed for using a coupon or asking for help. As she locked the door behind her that evening, Eleanor felt a sense of accomplishment, not for what she had done, but for what she was about to do. The road ahead would be difficult, but it was a road she was ready to walk, one step at a time. The following days were filled with activity, as Eleanor began to implement her plan. She spent hours in the store, getting to know her staff, organizing the shelves, and making small but meaningful changes. The first order of business was tackling the pricing. She couldn't change everything overnight, but she could begin by lowering prices on basic necessities like milk, bread, and eggs, items people relied on most. She worked closely with the suppliers to negotiate better deals, explaining her vision for a community-focused business. It took some time, but slowly, they began to see the potential in her approach. When the new price tags were placed on the shelves, the change was subtle but effective. Milk that had once been priced at $3.79 was now $2.99. Bread, which had hovered around $2.50, was now $1.99. It wasn't just about making things cheaper, it was about sending a message. Eleanor wanted every person who walked through those doors to feel that their money was being spent with dignity, not at the whim of a corporate price hike. The staff, however, wasn't as easily swayed. There were murmurs of discontent in the break room as Greg's influence lingered in the air. Jasmine, the cashier who had greeted Eleanor on her first day, was skeptical of the changes. "Lower prices mean lower paychecks for us, right?" she asked one morning as she scanned a customer's items. Eleanor had heard the whispers, and she didn't shy away from confronting them. She sat down with Jasmine that afternoon, offering her a cup of coffee in the small staff lounge behind the store. The room, with its yellow walls and a single window overlooking the parking lot, felt like a temporary space, one that, like the rest of the store, was in need of a little attention. "Jasmine, I know the idea of lower prices sounds like it might hurt your paycheck," Eleanor began, her tone warm but firm. "But the goal here isn't to hurt anyone. We'll find a way to make the business sustainable. What I'm doing is about building trust. If customers see value, they'll come back, and when they come back, we'll all benefit." Jasmine looked at her, doubt still clouding her expression. "It's a big risk. What if it doesn't work?" Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her eyes focused. "I'm not doing this to fail, Jasmine. I'm doing this to make sure people like you, like me, don't get overlooked. You don't have to believe it all right now, but stick with me and you'll see it." Jasmine nodded slowly, her skepticism still there, but something in Eleanor's words seemed to settle in. "Okay, I'll give it a shot." Eleanor left the break room with a small sense of victory. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that change, real change, took time. Every conversation, every decision, and every small success added up, and she could feel the momentum building ever so slightly. The next step was to introduce the community corner, a small section of the store where customers could donate non-perishable items for those in need. Eleanor had seen this in a few other businesses, and she knew it could make a difference. It wasn't just about charity. It was about creating a culture of giving and support. She had no illusions that it would be easy, but she believed it was necessary. The first few donations trickled in slowly, but as word spread, so did the donations. In the evenings, when the store was quiet and the aisles no longer hummed with the sound of footsteps, Eleanor sat at her desk in the back office, sifting through paperwork. She was still learning the ins and outs of the business, but she took pride in the way the store was evolving. Her plans weren't perfect, but they were making a difference, and that was enough for now. Weeks passed, and the changes in Harper's groceries began to take root, though not without resistance. Greg Harper still lurked around, his presence a constant reminder that he wasn't entirely ready to relinquish control. He stopped short of openly sabotaging Eleanor's efforts, but his reluctance to truly support her was evident in his actions. The atmosphere in the store was still tense at times, especially during shifts when Eleanor wasn't there. But despite his reluctance, there were signs of progress. Jasmine began to show more enthusiasm about the changes, taking on extra shifts and even offering to help reorganize the aisles. Mike, the stocker, had started speaking up more, suggesting ways to streamline inventory and improve stock placement. Eleanor could see that her vision was beginning to resonate, even if it hadn't completely taken hold yet. One evening, as Eleanor walked through the store, she caught sight of a regular customer, a middle-aged woman named Ruth, staring at the new price tags on the canned vegetables. Ruth had been a loyal customer for years, often commenting on how expensive the store had become, and Eleanor had made it a point to check in with her from time to time. "How's the new pricing working out for you, Ruth?" Eleanor asked as she approached. Ruth looked up, a slow smile spreading across her face. "I have to admit, I didn't think much of it at first, but now it's hard to ignore. I've saved a few bucks on things I buy regularly, and that makes a difference." Eleanor smiled, relieved that the effort was starting to pay off in small ways. "I'm glad to hear that. Every little bit helps." Ruth's smile faded slightly, and she leaned in a little closer, lowering her voice. "You know, I heard some of the other customers complaining. About Greg, I mean. They're saying the prices are too low and that it's going to hurt the store." Eleanor's heart sank for a moment. She'd expected resistance, but it still stung. "And what do you think?" Ruth's eyes softened as she placed a hand on Eleanor's arm. "I think you're doing something good here. I think the people who complain don't see it yet, but they will. You're giving them what they've needed for a long time. Maybe they just don't know how to appreciate it yet." Eleanor nodded, grateful for Ruth's kind words. "Thank you. That means a lot." As Ruth wandered off to pick out a few more items, Eleanor took a deep breath and looked around the store. It was still far from perfect, but there was something new in the air, something that hadn't been there before. There was a sense of possibility now, a hope that this small, struggling grocery store could become something more. And for the first time since she had purchased the store, Eleanor felt the weight of the task ahead lighten ever so slightly. It was still a long road, but it was a road she was determined to walk, step by step. By the time the store's first month under Eleanor's ownership came to an end, a subtle shift had occurred. There was still a long way to go, and the store's transformation wasn't something that could be measured by a few price cuts or new promotions alone. But the changes were undeniable. Customers were beginning to notice. The aisles felt less cramped and more organized. The staff was more engaged, and there was a fresh energy in the air. Eleanor's commitment to her vision was starting to pay off, even if it wasn't yet clear to everyone. Greg, however, remained a thorn in her side. Though he had reluctantly started to follow her lead on some things, such as stocking the new community corner with donated goods, he still undermined her efforts when she wasn't around. He frequently questioned her decisions in front of the staff and made offhand comments to customers about how things used to be better before she arrived. His passive resistance was a constant reminder of the challenge she faced in earning not only his cooperation, but also the loyalty of the rest of the staff. It wasn't long before Eleanor had to confront him directly. One chilly Thursday morning, after the store had quieted down, she called him into the back office. As he stood there, his arms crossed and his expression defensive, Eleanor sat behind the desk, her fingers tapping lightly on the wood. "I've noticed some things, Greg," she began, her voice calm but firm. "You've been pushing back against a lot of the changes we've made, and while I understand you may have some concerns, I need you to understand something very clearly. This isn't about us versus each other. It's about the store and the people who rely on it." Greg shifted uneasily, not meeting her eyes. "I just think you're moving too fast. You can't change everything overnight. People need time to adjust." Eleanor leaned forward, fixing him with a steady gaze. "I don't expect instant results, but I need your support. We're working toward something bigger than just keeping the lights on. I know you have your reservations, but if we want this store to survive, we need to be united." Greg exhaled sharply and finally looked at her. "I don't trust this community stuff. It feels like you're just giving things away and it won't last. Businesses like this don't survive by being nice." Eleanor's expression softened, but there was a firmness in her tone that wasn't there before. "Businesses like this survive by being relevant, by giving people a reason to come back. I'm not giving anything away, Greg. I'm offering people a place they can count on. If you want to continue working here, you're going to have to get on board with that." The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Greg shifted again, his jaw tight, but after a long pause, he nodded slowly. "Fine, I'll try, but don't expect me to be happy about it." Eleanor let out a quiet breath, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "That's all I ask. A little cooperation goes a long way." As Greg left her office, Eleanor leaned back in her chair, a sense of relief washing over her. She knew Greg wasn't fully on board, but his reluctant agreement was a start. There was something about him, a stubbornness that reminded her of Charles, a quality that could be useful if she could channel it in the right direction. She wasn't naive enough to think he would change overnight, but at least for now, he wasn't openly fighting her. That, she realized, was a victory in itself. The days that followed brought a wave of challenges, but also the beginnings of deeper connections with the community. Eleanor's focus on fairness in pricing, her commitment to creating a welcoming environment, and her efforts to build trust were starting to attract new faces. The community corner had become a place where people could drop off items to help those in need, and the small budgeting and couponing workshops she'd begun to organize were gaining traction. It wasn't much, but it was a foundation. One Friday afternoon, as Eleanor sorted through the store's financial reports, a young mother named Tina stopped by the counter. Tina had 2 small children with her, both of whom were eyeing the candy aisle eagerly. Eleanor had spoken with her a few times before during her visits to the store. Tina had a gentle but tired demeanor, always rushing to finish her shopping and get back home. "Tina, right?" Eleanor greeted, looking up with a smile. Tina smiled back, though there was a weariness to it. "Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks, Eleanor, for the price cuts. My kids eat a lot of cereal, and the prices here, they're not like they used to be. It's making a difference." Eleanor's heart warmed at the words. "I'm glad it's helping," she said. "That's exactly why I'm doing this. Families shouldn't have to choose between food and bills." Tina hesitated for a moment, glancing down at her children. I've been thinking about the coupon workshop you mentioned. I know I could use a little help when it comes to budgeting. I don't know much about it, honestly, but I want to make sure I'm doing right by my kids." Eleanor's smile deepened, and she nodded. "We'll be having one next week. You're more than welcome to join. I think you'll find it useful." Tina looked relieved, her shoulders visibly relaxing as she took in the offer. "I'll be there," she said, her voice a little stronger. "Thank you again, Eleanor. You've really changed things around here. I can already tell." As Tina walked away, Eleanor's thoughts lingered on the encounter. It was small, yes, but it was a sign that people were beginning to notice. The hard work, the sleepless nights spent planning, the meetings with suppliers, and the countless conversations with the staff were starting to have an impact. And though she knew there was still much to be done, Eleanor couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. It was working. Slowly but surely she was making a difference. It wasn't just about low prices. It was about creating a space where people felt they were valued. And the store, the heart of this small community, was becoming a symbol of that change. The journey ahead wasn't going to be easy, but in that moment, as Eleanor looked around her store and saw the customers, people she knew, people she cared about, she realized that she wasn't alone in this fight. And that was the first real victory. As the weeks turned into months, Eleanor's vision for Harper's Groceries began to take shape in ways she had not anticipated. The community corner had grown, becoming a central hub of activity. It was no longer just a place where people left canned goods. It had become a focal point for people to exchange recipes, share stories, and help one another. Eleanor had set up a small bulletin board near the entrance where customers could post flyers for jobs, offer babysitting, or even announce local events. What had once been a sterile corporate space now felt like a living, breathing part of the community. Greg Harper, still distant and begrudging, had started to contribute in his own way. Though his involvement was minimal, Eleanor noticed he was more willing to step in when things got tough, helping out on the floor during busy hours, or offering to assist in stocking the shelves when they were running low. He wasn't the enthusiastic partner she had hoped for, but at least he wasn't actively working against her. Eleanor took what she could get, and while there were still times when his passive resistance would surface, she chose to focus on the progress rather than the setbacks. One particularly busy afternoon, Eleanor was at the front of the store when a young man entered, carrying a stack of papers in his hand. His name was Jared, a local volunteer who had helped organize the community center's food drives in the past. He had heard about the workshops Eleanor had started and had an idea of his own. "Eleanor," Jared said, stopping in front of her with a bright smile, "I've been hearing great things about what you're doing here. It's amazing to see a store really making a difference." Eleanor returned his smile, though she could tell there was something more behind his enthusiasm. "Thank you, Jared. That means a lot." He handed her the stack of papers, which were filled with scribbled notes. "Well, I had an idea I wanted to run by you. You're already hosting the budgeting workshops, right? What if we extended that and made it more of a community resource, a place where people can learn about more than just saving money, like cooking on a budget or health and nutrition?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "You want to make it more than just budgeting? I like the sound of that." Jared nodded eagerly. "Exactly. There are so many people who struggle to make their dollars stretch. But it's not just about cutting coupons. It's about teaching them how to make better choices with the resources they already have. I think we could bring in some local experts, nutritionists, chefs, even financial advisors, and offer a whole series of free workshops." Eleanor's mind raced as she thought about the possibilities. She had always wanted to do more than just offer cheaper prices. She wanted to empower people, to give them the tools to improve their lives. The idea of expanding the workshops into something that could transform lives beyond the walls of the store filled her with excitement. "I love it," she said, smiling. "Let's make it happen. We'll start small, maybe a few classes a month, and see how it goes. I'll help organize the space and get the word out." Over the next few weeks, they began to put the plan into motion. Jared reached out to local experts who were willing to volunteer their time, and Eleanor used the store's community bulletin board to advertise the workshops. Word spread quickly, and soon enough the store was buzzing with excitement. The first event was a cooking demonstration led by Samantha, a local chef who specialized in budget-friendly meals. The turnout was greater than expected, and Eleanor could see the enthusiasm in the crowd as Samantha demonstrated how to create a nutritious, hearty meal for a family of 4, using basic ingredients that could be found in the store. The attendees were engaged, asking questions and taking notes. It felt like the beginning of something powerful, a shift in the way people viewed not just the store, but the community itself. Eleanor watched the room filled with people from all walks of life, young and old, working class and retired. It wasn't just a cooking class, it was a gathering of people coming together, learning and sharing as a community. As the evening wore on, Eleanor stood at the back of the room, a quiet sense of satisfaction settling in her chest. She had come here to change things, to give people hope, and now she was seeing the fruits of that labor unfold before her eyes. The success of the workshops was just the beginning. As the months passed, Eleanor found herself drawn further into the fabric of the community. The store wasn't just a place to buy groceries, it was becoming a lifeline. People who had once walked in with heads down, simply trying to get what they needed and leave, were now taking the time to engage, to chat with one another and to share experiences. The price cuts had continued to draw in new customers, but it was the sense of belonging that kept them coming back. Word of mouth spread like wildfire. The store's new focus on affordable living, healthy eating, and community connection turned Harper's Groceries into something more than a business. It became a symbol of hope. And Eleanor's relationship with Greg, though still strained, began to show signs of thawing. He still didn't fully understand her vision, and there were moments when he would mock the more idealistic aspects of her plan. But little by little, he began to see the impact it was having. One afternoon, as he helped rearrange the shelves, he turned to her with a look that was surprisingly thoughtful. "You know," Greg said, a hint of curiosity in his voice, I never thought this place would turn into what it has. I didn't think people cared about low prices or the whole community thing. But, you've proved me wrong." Eleanor smiled. A warm, genuine smile. "It's not just about the prices, Greg. It's about people feeling like they matter. When you treat people with respect, they come back. And when they come back, they bring others with them." Greg grunted, not fully convinced, but it was the closest he'd come to acknowledging her vision. Eleanor didn't need his complete approval, but it was nice to see some level of understanding. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. However, Eleanor knew that the real test was still ahead. The store's transformation had begun, but the future was uncertain. Would the changes stick? Would the community continue to embrace the store as its own? The next few months would reveal the answers, but Eleanor had a quiet confidence now. She wasn't just fighting for a store. She was fighting for something much larger. She was fighting for dignity, for respect, and for the power of community. As she stood behind the counter that evening, watching as customers walked in and out, chatting and laughing with each other, Eleanor felt a deep sense of pride. She had done it. She had taken control of something that others thought was beyond saving, and in the process, she had given people more than just food. She had given them hope, and that, she realized, was the greatest victory of all. As the weeks turned into months, the store's success continued to grow, but so did the pressures. Eleanor had created something truly remarkable at Harper's Groceries, a community-centered space that offered not just affordable prices, but also a sense of belonging. The workshops continued to be a hit, and more customers came through the doors each week, often staying longer to chat with neighbors, attend a class, or contribute to the community corner. Eleanor's hard work and dedication were paying off, and for the first time in years, she felt like she was making a real difference. But the challenges were far from over. As the business grew, so did the complexity of running it. The logistics of managing the inventory, maintaining customer satisfaction, and balancing the books were becoming more demanding. Eleanor had learned a lot over the past few months, but she was still navigating uncharted territory. She spent countless nights at the store, organizing shipments, reviewing sales figures, and ensuring the staff was properly trained. Greg, though less overtly resistant, still didn't share Eleanor's enthusiasm for the community-centered approach. He was starting to feel the weight of her growing influence in the store. Though he had agreed to follow her lead, there were moments when his impatience bubbled to the surface, especially when things didn't go as planned. One afternoon, Eleanor noticed him speaking in hushed tones with a few of the other employees, his back to her as he gestured toward the front of the store. She didn't need to hear the words to know that something was being said about her, something that wasn't entirely supportive. Later that day, as the store quieted down, Eleanor approached Greg in the stockroom, her footsteps deliberate. She could sense the tension in the air, thick with unspoken words. When he saw her, Greg stiffened, trying to mask his discomfort. Eleanor didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I overheard you talking earlier," she said, her voice calm but firm. "And I'm not blind to the fact that you're not fully on board with the direction this store is going. I need to know where you stand, Greg. Are you with me on this, or are you just biding your time until something goes wrong?" Greg looked away for a moment, clearly frustrated. "Look, Eleanor, I get it, okay? You want to turn this place into some kind of community center, and I'm fine with that to a point. But when people start thinking they're entitled to discounts because they're friends of the store, or when the lines are backed up because we're giving away free workshops, that's where I draw the line. I'm here to run a business, not a charity." Eleanor's gaze hardened, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm not running a charity, Greg. I'm running a business that understands the importance of community. And that's something you'll never see on a balance sheet. The people who walk in here are the heart of this place. If you can't see that, maybe this isn't the job for you." There was a long pause, and for a moment, Eleanor wasn't sure how Greg would respond. But then, to her surprise, he met her gaze and nodded slowly, almost reluctantly. "I get it," he muttered. "Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it's not just about the numbers, but I'm still not convinced all of this is sustainable." Eleanor softened slightly. "I understand. And I'm not asking you to believe in it all just yet. But you have to trust me when I say that people will keep coming back, not because of discounts, but because they know we care about them." Greg didn't say anything for a long time, but his expression shifted, as though he was finally starting to understand the depth of what Eleanor was trying to do. "I'll try. I won't promise to always agree with you, but I'll try to be part of the team." Eleanor nodded, relieved that they had finally come to some understanding. She wasn't asking for blind loyalty, just a willingness to be part of something bigger than their individual disagreements. The store had come this far because of her vision, but it couldn't survive without the cooperation of the people around her, Greg included. As Eleanor left the stockroom that evening, the weight of the conversation still hung heavy in her chest. Greg's reluctant concession had brought some peace, but she knew that challenges still lay ahead. Her goal had always been to build something sustainable, not just for the store, but for the community it served. That was the real test. Could she keep this balance of business and community going? And could she continue to foster an environment where people not only found affordable groceries, but also felt seen and heard? The next morning, Eleanor received a call from Vanessa, the attorney who had helped her purchase the store. There was a sense of urgency in Vanessa's voice, something that immediately put Eleanor on alert. "Eleanor," Vanessa began, her voice tight with concern, "I've been going through some paperwork, and it seems there's a legal issue with the store's property. The landowner, the one who leases the space to you, is looking to increase the rent significantly. We're talking about a substantial hike, almost double what you're currently paying." Eleanor's stomach sank. Rent was already a large portion of her monthly expenses, and the idea of a sudden increase could send the store's already fragile financials into a tailspin. She took a deep breath before responding. "How soon would this happen?" she asked, her mind racing. "It's effective in about 6 weeks, Vanessa replied. "You need to act fast if you want to negotiate. This could be a serious threat to your business." Eleanor thanked Vanessa and hung up, her mind swirling with the implications. She couldn't afford to lose the store, not after everything she had worked for. And yet the reality of the situation weighed heavily on her. She had fought tooth and nail to make Harper's Groceries a place where people felt valued, where the community could thrive. But if she didn't find a way to navigate this rent increase, it could all come crashing down. Eleanor knew that she couldn't do this alone. She needed to find a solution, and she needed to find it fast. She thought back to the first time she had walked into the store as its new owner, determined to make a change. That determination hadn't faltered since, and now was no different. She would fight for this store, for her community, and for everything she had built. But she couldn't do it without the support of the people who had helped her get this far. And as she sat down at her desk to draft a plan, she knew the next step would require all the strength, courage, and resourcefulness she had. Harper's Groceries was not just a store, it was a symbol of something greater, and she wasn't about to let it slip away without a fight. Eleanor spent the next few days in a whirlwind of meetings and phone calls, her mind racing as she tried to find a solution to the looming rent increase. The news had hit her harder than she had anticipated. It wasn't just a financial blow, it was a threat to everything she had worked for. Harper's Groceries wasn't just a store. It had become a lifeline for so many in the community. The thought of losing it, of watching the place she had poured her heart into slip through her fingers, was unbearable. Her first step was to meet with Vanessa again, who had already started looking into the legal options available. Vanessa had suggested that they try to negotiate with the landlord, but Eleanor knew it wouldn't be easy. Landlords were notoriously hard to deal with, especially when they saw an opportunity to increase their profits. The idea of appealing to the landlord's sense of compassion seemed like a long shot, but Eleanor wasn't willing to give up without a fight. That afternoon, Eleanor walked into the store feeling a mix of determination and anxiety. She couldn't let the stress show, not in front of her employees, not in front of the customers. She had to remain calm, present a confident front. The community depended on her, and the last thing she wanted was for them to sense her fear. As she passed through the aisles, she noticed how much the store had changed. The shelves were full, the produce section vibrant with color. The smell of fresh bread filled the air, and the sound of chatter and laughter echoed through the aisles. This wasn't just a grocery store anymore. It was a home, a place where people came not just to buy food but to connect. She couldn't let that slip away. She spotted Greg at the counter, handling a customer's order. He looked up as she approached, and for a moment, they simply stood there, exchanging a silent understanding. "How's everything going?" Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer. Greg sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know, Eleanor. Things are getting more complicated, huh?" She nodded, her stomach tightening at the weight of the conversation. "I just got the news about the rent increase." Greg's expression softened slightly, a rare moment of empathy breaking through his usual guarded demeanor. "I figured something like that might be coming. That place is too valuable to stay at those old prices for long." Eleanor exhaled slowly, trying to steady herself. "I can't let that happen, not after everything we've worked for." Greg looked at her for a long moment, his brows furrowed in thought. "So, what's the plan?" Eleanor straightened, her resolve hardening. "We negotiate. We fight for it. I'm not going to let this store go down without a fight, and I need your help. I'm going to need everyone's help." He hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "I'm with you. We can't lose this place." Eleanor felt a rush of gratitude. She had spent so much time trying to get Greg on her side, and now, even if it wasn't all the way there, she could see that he was willing to stand by her. That made all the difference. Together, they started to formulate a plan. Greg suggested that they rally the community, get as many customers and neighbors on their side as possible. Eleanor began organizing petitions and reaching out to local leaders, hoping to garner support. She knew that if they could show the landlord how much the store meant to the people, they might have a shot at convincing him to keep the rent affordable. But even as she moved forward with the plan, a nagging thought tugged at her. Would it be enough? Could a petition and some community support really change the landlord's mind? She wasn't sure, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't stop now. She had come this far, and there was no turning back. The next few weeks were filled with intense preparation. Eleanor worked tirelessly to get the word out about the rent increase and the petition she was organizing. She used every avenue available to her, social media, flyers, word of mouth, to spread the message that Harper's Groceries wasn't just a business. It was a cornerstone of the community, and it needed to be preserved. The response from the community was overwhelming. Regular customers stopped by to sign the petition, and many of them took the time to write personal letters about what the store meant to them. The story of Harper's Groceries had become something larger than just Eleanor's fight for affordable rent. It had become a symbol of what could happen when a community came together. The outpouring of support was more than she had hoped for, and it gave her the strength she needed to push forward. Greg, too, had been more active, helping Eleanor coordinate the petition efforts and encouraging others to speak out. He had never been the type to get involved in community issues, but something about this cause had struck a chord with him. Maybe it was because he had seen firsthand how Eleanor had turned the store around. Or maybe it was because he had finally begun to see the value of the community-centered approach. Whatever the reason, he was there, helping Eleanor fight for what mattered. One evening, as the store began to quiet down, Eleanor and Greg sat down at a small table in the back office, surrounded by stacks of petition forms and letters. The landlord's deadline for the rent increase was fast approaching, and Eleanor knew they didn't have much time left. "So, what now?" Greg asked, his fingers drumming on the table nervously. "You really think all this will work?" Eleanor glanced over the petitions once more, feeling a sense of quiet pride. There were thousands of signatures, dozens of heartfelt letters. The support was there. It just needed to be presented in a way that would make the landlord understand. "We're going to present everything we've gathered," she said firmly. "The community support, the petitions, the stories. We're going to show him how much this place means to people. If we can't convince him to lower the rent, then at least we'll give it everything we've got." Greg leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowing in thought. "It's a long shot, but I'll help however I can. I don't want to see this place go under." Eleanor smiled, grateful for his support. "Thanks, Greg. You've been more help than you know." With the deadline looming, Eleanor knew that the next few days would be crucial. It wasn't just about the store anymore. It was about the people who relied on it, the community that had rallied around her vision. She wasn't going to let that go without a fight. That evening, as she sat in the back office, she realized something. She wasn't fighting just to save a store. She was fighting for the future of a community that had found strength in each other, a place where people felt connected, valued, and supported. And she wasn't going to let that slip away, no matter the cost. The days leading up to the meeting with the landlord were a blur. Eleanor spent every waking hour preparing, going over her notes, rehearsing her talking points, and making sure the petitions were organized in a way that would clearly illustrate the support they had gathered. She was exhausted, but she couldn't afford to let it show. The community's faith in her was tangible, and the weight of their hopes rested on her shoulders. She couldn't let them down. On the morning of the meeting, Eleanor arrived early at the landlord's office, a folder full of petitions, letters, and customer testimonials in hand. She was nervous, but she wasn't going to let that stop her. She had fought too hard to get to this point. As she waited for the landlord's assistant to call her into the meeting, Eleanor went over her strategy one last time. She knew the key was to keep the focus on the community impact. The store wasn't just a business to them. It was a lifeline, a place where people came together to support one another. When she was finally called into the meeting room, Eleanor took a deep breath and walked in, standing tall. The landlord, Mr. Davis Eusestiu, was sitting at a long table, his cold eyes scanning through a stack of paperwork. His sharp suit and polished demeanor gave him an air of authority, but Eleanor wasn't intimidated. She had a purpose, and she wasn't going to let anything derail her. "Ms. Williams," Mr. Davis greeted her without looking up, his voice devoid of warmth. "Let's get this over with. I understand you have some concerns about the rent increase." Eleanor sat down across from him, placing the folder carefully in front of her. "Yes, Mr. Davis, I do. And I'd like to present you with some information that I think will make you reconsider this decision." He raised an eyebrow but said nothing, motioning for her to continue. Eleanor opened the folder, pulling out the stack of petitions and letters. She organized them neatly, placing them in front of him one by one. "This," she began, "is a petition signed by over 3,000 people who are regular customers of Harper's Groceries. These are their names, their stories, their reasons for supporting this store. They don't just come here to buy groceries. They come here because this place matters to them. Because it's more than a business, it's part of their lives." Mr. Davis looked at the stack of papers, his expression unchanged. "I'm not interested in sentimentality, Ms. Williams. This is business. The costs of running a property like this have gone up. I need to adjust the rent accordingly." Eleanor didn't flinch. "I understand that," she said firmly. "But increasing the rent by such a substantial amount will not only put the store out of business, it will impact the entire community. People like the ones who signed this petition, they rely on this store. The prices we offer are affordable, but that's only possible because we've kept overhead costs manageable. If the rent goes up, we will be forced to raise prices, and that will drive our customers away." She paused, letting the weight of her words hang in the air. "This store is a cornerstone of this neighborhood. We are providing jobs, access to affordable food, and a place for people to connect. Losing it would have a ripple effect, and that's why I'm asking you to reconsider the increase, for the sake of the people who depend on this store every day." For a long moment, Mr. Davis remained silent. He flipped through the petitions slowly, his face unreadable. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest, but she held her ground, keeping her voice steady as she continued to speak from the heart. "We're not asking for charity, Mr. Davis. We're asking for a fair rent, one that allows us to continue serving this community while still being able to sustain the business. I'm willing to meet somewhere in the middle, to negotiate, but we cannot continue with this increase. Mr. Davis set the papers down and leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in thought. Eleanor couldn't read his expression, but she could feel the tension in the room. She wasn't sure if her plea had made any impact, but she refused to leave without making sure he understood just how crucial this was. "Let me think it over," Mr. Davis finally said, his tone much less dismissive than it had been when they first started. "I'll review the numbers and get back to you." Eleanor stood up, her heart racing. "Thank you," she said, the words coming out with more sincerity than she had expected. "I appreciate your time and consideration." As she left the office, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling of unease. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it wasn't a loss either. Mr. Davis hadn't agreed to anything, but she had planted a seed. Now, all she could do was wait. The next few days felt like an eternity. Eleanor kept herself busy at the store, but her mind was never far from the meeting with Mr. Davis. Every time the phone rang or an email notification pinged, her heart would race only to feel a rush of disappointment when it wasn't the landlord's office. She knew she had done everything she could to make her case. Now it was out of her hands. Greg had been a steady source of support during this time. He helped with the store's day-to-day operations and kept the atmosphere positive, even when things felt uncertain. The staff, too, seemed to rally around Eleanor, their commitment to the store evident in their work. It wasn't just a job to them anymore. It was a cause, something worth fighting for. And then, one afternoon, as Eleanor was reorganizing the shelf of canned goods, the phone rang. It was Mr. Davis. Her heart skipped a beat as she picked up the receiver. "Ms. Williams," Mr. Davis began, his tone flat. "I've reviewed everything you presented, and I've decided to make an offer." Eleanor held her breath, waiting for him to continue. "I will reduce the rent increase by half," he said, his voice neutral. "However, I expect you to sign a new lease within the week. I'm not going to wait forever." A wave of relief washed over Eleanor, but it was tempered with the realization that this wasn't exactly the outcome she had hoped for. Still, it was a win, just not as much of a win as she had dreamed of. The rent would still go up, but at least it wouldn't cripple the business. "Thank you, Mr. Davis," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. "I appreciate your willingness to work with us. We'll have the new lease signed as soon as possible." She hung up the phone and let out a long, deep breath. The fight wasn't over, but for now, they had secured a future. Harper's Groceries would survive, and for that, Eleanor was grateful. It wasn't the perfect resolution, but it was enough, and she would take it. With the news in hand, Eleanor walked into the main area of the store, where the customers were coming in for their evening shopping. As she looked around, seeing the familiar faces, the smiling staff, and the community that had come together to support the store, she knew one thing for certain. This place wasn't just a store. It was a symbol of resilience, and it wasn't going anywhere. Not on her watch. Eleanor stood at the front of the store, watching the steady stream of customers come in and out, each one greeted by a warm smile from the staff. The pressure of the past few months had been immense, but now, with the rent increase under control and the store continuing to thrive, a sense of peace settled over her. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Greg had started to take a more active role, genuinely supporting the changes, and the staff was more engaged than ever. The workshops had become a regular part of the store's offerings, and the community corner was now a bustling hub of donations, support, and shared resources. Harper's Groceries had become more than just a place to shop. It had become a pillar of the community. As Eleanor looked around, she realized that the store had evolved into something far beyond what she had imagined. It wasn't just about affordable prices or business. It was about giving people a place to belong. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them. She had built something lasting, something that would continue to serve the community for years to come. Eleanor smiled softly to herself. The fight had been long, but she had won. And Harper's Groceries would always be more than just a store. It was a testament to the power of community, resilience, and the difference one person could make. Eleanor's journey with Harper's Groceries was never just about running a store. It was about building a community, creating a space where people felt valued, and proving that businesses could thrive while prioritizing people over profit. From the initial struggle against the overwhelming rent increase to transforming the store into a hub of support, Eleanor demonstrated what could be accomplished when determination, compassion, and a deep sense of purpose drove the mission. Through countless setbacks and moments of doubt, Eleanor's vision remained clear, creating a place where families could afford to live with dignity and where every customer felt like part of something bigger. Today, Harper's Groceries isn't just a successful business. It's a symbol of what can happen when a community comes together to fight for what's right. If Eleanor's story has inspired you, remember that the changes you wish to see don't have to be big to be impactful. Start small, take action, and believe in the power of your community. Whether it's in your business or everyday life, you have the ability to make a difference. Are you ready to create change in your own community? Start today. Your actions can build the future you want to see.